Good morning and welcome to Selling Healthcare Life Sciences to the Mainland China Market webinar, brought to you by the Department for International Trade Southwest and Business West in partnership with Western Gateway. My name is Mark and I work for the events team here at DIT. Before we start today's webinar, here are some housekeeping points. If you're having any technical difficulties, please type them into the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen and direct them to DITSW Events, and I will endeavour to help. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A tab. We have allowed time at the end for these to be answered. We will try our best to get through all of the questions, but those who are unable to answer, we will follow up after the event. Finally, please note this webinar will be recorded. I'm now pleased to introduce my colleague, Jamie Shaw, who's the Department for International Trade Southwest Healthcare and Life Science Sector Specialist. Over to you, Jamie.
Yes, morning, Mark. Thank you very much, and welcome to everybody that's attending here today. Good morning if you're in the UK. Good afternoon to those that are in China or further afield from the UK. This event this morning for me is an opportunity really to better support companies in the Southwest in the healthcare life sciences sector with their export strategies. We can see from the attendees that we have a real mix actually of companies that are joining today, and that's fantastic. For me, China, whether we engage with China in our respective businesses or we don't, it's simply a market that cannot be ignored, and that's the reason that we're focusing on China today. This is actually the first event in a 5-part series looking at various export markets. For those that sign up, when you receive your slides post-event, you will also see on there the other events that we're doing in the series. So China, for me, I guess, comes with two angles, an objective angle and a subjective angle. The objective angle is that it's the second largest healthcare market in the world. And as I said, I think whether we engage or we don't engage with China, we cannot ignore China. Subjectively, it's a place where I used to live and work. So on that map, on that picture there, is the high-tech park in Shenzhen, and that company there, Mindray, is where I was working for 4 years, who are China's largest medical device manufacturer. So China is close to me, both professionally and I guess we can say personally as well. Just briefly about DIT before I introduce us to our expert panelists and speakers today. The DIT is here for one simple reason: to support UK businesses to grow internationally. I guess our jewel in the crown, so to speak, is our coverage. We operate globally in over 100 countries. We're based at embassies, consulates, and high commissions there. We have a significant number of staff there to support UK businesses. We work with global partner organisations in markets. One of those contractual and official relationships is present today with Mark, representing the CBBC, the China-Britain Business Council, one of DIT's delivery partners. I'm based in Bristol. Business West is based in the Southwest, covering the region. We provide professional and impartial export advice. We help businesses to create and deliver export strategies, and we connect businesses to in-market help and support. There's lots of programs and support. There's lots of ways that you can get involved. For those of you that are already working with the Department for International Trade, we hope and assume you have a regular working relationship with your international trade advisor, so do stay close to them. For those that don't have an international trade advisor, please feel free to get in touch with me after the event and we can have a one-to-one conversation. But essentially, there's a lot of ways that we can help you. Those include trade shows via the Trade Access Programme support, market research, the ESIF internationalisation project, which is ongoing at the moment, which is an opportunity to tap into match-funded support to the value of £9,000 for qualifying businesses. There's UK export finance as well. Essentially, no viable export in the UK should fail through lack of finance. Resources include myself, our website, interestingly the Export Academy as well, which is being run here in the Southwest. Perhaps in addition to the forthcoming events I'm going to be running that we send to attendees, I'll make a note to share the Export Academy as well, which is a series of sessions supporting new to exporters. That's not existing exporters can join the series as well, but it's essentially a refresher, a top-up of a number of 1-hour events going through the roadmap of exporting. So very useful for businesses that want a refresher or are new to export. Brexit new rules are there, available on the .gov website. Essentially, we want to identify the biggest healthcare opportunities, engage UK healthcare sector in maximising export potential, promote the UK healthcare sector internationally, and convert opportunities into export success. I was brought into this role in September, October, so I'm fairly new to DIT, but essentially DIT has recognised that in the Southwest, the healthcare life sciences companies that are out there have essentially really high potential to internationalise. So my role is to work with companies that we are, I guess, not working with at the moment or is unaware of the opportunity that exists for companies that are within our healthcare life sciences sector and want to export. And the backdrop to why we are encouraging businesses in our sector, which is, of course, fantastic, is essentially the contribution it makes to the UK economy is very significant of all manufactured goods exported. There's obviously a high demand the UK healthcare supply chain, the NHS, the institutions, of course, the suppliers into that are world class, and of course that's something that's admired, respected, and in demand in overseas markets. The market, the subsectors within it are going to continue to grow. And yes, finally, in the Southwest, companies of all shapes and sizes may not realise that they indeed either have an opportunity to export or expand their exports significantly. And as I mentioned, it's good that we have attendees today that perhaps may be considering, well, is China too far a stretch for us as a business at the moment? And if that's the case, then that's absolutely fine. That's the beauty of doing this event today, because it gives us all an opportunity to actually assess professionally and with diligence whether or not this is the right next step for us. We can't do these events without our partners, so I'd like to also thank Mark Headley from the China-Britain Business Council, Graham McCallan from NJ Akers Co, and Hamish King from Cisema, who will all be speaking today. So without further ado, I would like to pass you on to our first guest speaker, who is Mark Headley, who is the Director of the Knowledge Economy at the China-Britain Business Council, who is going to talk a little bit more about China's healthcare market. So thank you very much for joining. Hope you find it interesting. And Mark, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Jamie, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to join today's webinar. As Jamie says, my name is Mark Headley. I'm a director at the China-Britain Business Council. I focus particularly on companies in the technology sector, including healthcare and life sciences technology businesses. And obviously, the CBBC is the main UK national network helping UK businesses to connect with China and vice versa. So without further ado, I would like to sort of, I guess, start today's session by talking about the wider context of the Chinese economy and UK-China trade. Obviously, we're living in very turbulent times, and I think that applies globally. China, as I'm sure everyone will be aware, was the first country to be affected by the pandemic almost exactly a year ago, when the outbreak first occurred in Wuhan. Obviously, we were badly affected by that in terms of our offices were closed, and we found that there was a sudden halt to sort of UK-China trade, which then was then impacted the UK economy as well. And we're all obviously waiting with bated breath to see how the UK and the global economy recovered. However, China has been something of a bright light in 2020. You can see from the chart there that although its GDP was badly affected in Q1 last year, it did rebound, and actually in Q4 it reached sort of 2.5% growth, which is actually a bit higher than what it had been averaging over the previous year. And actually, the IMF is expecting the Chinese economy to grow by around about 8.2% in 2021. So the Chinese economy's held up really, really well. Compared to, we've seen, minus 9.9% growth in the UK, the EU 27 and the US have all seen negative growth in 2020. So China's ability to respond to COVID quickly and effectively has meant that consumption has held up, and it remains a very attractive export destination in the sense that people are still spending money and economic activity is still very much happening. And that forms pattern of a longer term trend of Chinese growth. We've seen double-digit growth in China in years gone by, but even in recent years, we've been seeing 6-7% growth. And although that will moderate over time, and we're likely to see more growth more in sort of 4 or 5%, because the overall economy is bigger, it does mean that the quality of that growth is higher, and actually there's a greater demand for imported products and services. Sorry, I think I've zoomed in there. So the UK-China bilateral trading relationship, there's a lot of negativity around China at the moment in the press, coverage of human rights abuses, that type of thing. And I think that sometimes it's easy to forget that China is quite an important export destination for the UK. It's our sixth largest export destination. If you include Hong Kong in there, then I think it ranks third or fourth. So it's a vitally important market for the UK. It's still a long way behind even some of those European markets, which you would understand given their proximity. And the US is our largest single export destination, but it's growing very quickly. And actually, if you look at exports of services, we now have a trade surplus with China. We import about 5 times as much as we export in terms of products, but in terms of services, we do hold our own. So that's sort of where we see the opportunity, certainly in areas like education, healthcare services, healthcare training. These are real growth areas for the UK. But we're also exporting a lot in terms of the consumer market, whether that's kind of luxury cars, luxury fashion. The creative sector is very strong for the UK. And then obviously our world-leading innovation. So companies like AstraZeneca, which have huge investments in China, but also startups and scale-ups in the medical space, whether that's medical devices, med tech. There is a lot of opportunity in China for these businesses as the economy in China matures and becomes more sophisticated. So the healthcare sector overall, has been growing steadily. I'm not sure there's something funky's happened with the numbers on that graph, but you can see that there's a steady growth in terms of the overall market in China, which you would understand given the size of the population. It's a population of 1.4 billion people. In the past 2 decades, there's been a major shift in terms of the government policy around healthcare, investment, and access to healthcare insurance, with around about 95% coverage now, which is much higher than it used to be, even as little as 5 years ago. The key drivers, well, it's increased living standards, that rising wealth, the emerging middle class, has a growing demand for high quality healthcare provision. We see that in terms of the growth of the private healthcare segment, which is a real area of opportunity for UK exporters, and reform. So continuing government reform has helped to support the market. I don't think that we should be too overly optimistic about what the China market represents for British companies. We have to remember that China still is a developing country, and what you see is that the growth and the wealth is very unevenly distributed. And if you look at the healthcare sector, China is a very fragmented market. There are different tiers of hospitals, and depending on whether we're talking about urban, rural areas, townships, etc., the provision of healthcare does vary considerably. And for example, the number of doctors varies considerably between different local regions in China. So it is a very mixed picture, and you can see that in terms of the spending on proportion of spending on of GDP spending on healthcare. China, it still is quite a long way behind most Western countries. So there are still pressures in terms of pricing and so on that can make it challenging to enter the market. So it's important, I would say, to have a really good understanding of the healthcare market and where the opportunities lie for your business in order to sort of develop an effective strategy. A few other kind of key themes. So the top left-hand image here is just an advertisement for China's Healthy China 2030 policy, which was announced a couple of years ago. This is really worth looking at if you want to understand what the priorities for the Chinese government are. This policy sort of sets out 15 specific targets for China, a lot of which is focused on disease prevention, but also rolling out healthcare into rural areas, very much focused on innovation and scientific-driven healthcare development. So certainly worth looking at that in terms of seeing where the priorities are. Obviously, China does have, like many Asian countries, a rapidly aging population. So the proportion of over 60s was 12.4% in 2010. That is set to rise to 28% by 2040. So clearly, there is a need to support those over 60s with healthcare services, life sciences, medical products, etc. So it's a major challenge for China to address that. Also, air pollution. Air pollution in China has improved significantly in the last couple of years, but it's still a major problem. Urbanization means that around about 600,000 or 700,000 people die every year of air pollution-related conditions, not to mention other types of pollution. So it's a real priority for the Chinese government to deal with that. China's made big commitments on climate change. It will be an active participant in the COP26 conference later this year that happens in Glasgow. And I think that's, addressing those kind of climate-related healthcare problems is a major concern for the Chinese government. And then, of course, COVID, which has really driven a lot of the trends in China this year around shifting to digital healthcare, deploying new technologies, massive investment into vaccine development, etc., and new policies, improved public healthcare. So these are kind of the key trends really that are shaping the market. In terms of specific opportunities, clearly medical devices is an area where the UK has a strong capability, and it's a market that I think I'm right in saying that the China market is second only to the US in terms of size, and it's clearly, you can see there from the graph that it's growing very quickly. The medical device market in China has historically been quite challenging for overseas companies to access due to the regulations and the product approval process, which Hamish is going to talk about a little bit in a moment, and the complexity of that and the costs involved clearly will vary depending on the type of device that we're talking about, whether we're talking about implantable medical devices or lower end consumable type products. But clearly there's a growth trend there. You can see there that medical equipment and higher value medical consumables represent a relatively high proportion of the market. China also introduced a two invoice policy. It had the challenge of having more distributors than there were hospitals a few years ago. So clearly there was a lot of inefficiency in the system. There was problems with graft and corruption in the healthcare system, which are well documented. I think what that means for a Western supplier is that the market's becoming more transparent. and it's possible to enter the market through a single distributor, but that in itself brings particular challenges given the geographical complexity. So how do you operate in that market? It does rely on having local presence, either your own presence in China or a strong partner to work with. But I guess we can come on to that in the Q&A. Digital healthcare is another area where we're seeing rapid growth, and COVID has really accelerated this. There are already 900 million mobile internet users in China. There's a massive population of so-called silver surfers, the older generation, that access healthcare services through their smartphone. And actually, adoption rates in China are far higher than we see in the UK. Partly, I would say, partly due to the access, so the investment that's happened in 5G network, 4G and 5G networks, making coverage far more comprehensive in many parts of urban China than perhaps we see in other Western countries. Partly to do with lifestyle, and obviously the ubiquitousness of WeChat, and the fact that pretty much everyone in China uses these type of apps such as WeChat for their daily life, e-commerce and digital currency is pretty much universal now in China. So that's really made it easy for China to switch to these type of services, in that you have a population that's very willing to experiment with online healthcare. And that obviously for the UK, we have businesses that specialise in different aspects of digital healthcare, whether that's kind of apps and platforms to help with rehabilitation, with different aspects of healthcare. In some cases, it's patient records and data analysis. We have a number, obviously, of AI companies that specialize in using data to predict come up with better healthcare outcomes for patients. So there are opportunities for UK companies to work within this market. However, it is a very competitive marketplace, and it's dominated by China's leading tech companies. So companies like Alibaba, WeChat with its WeDoctor, Ping An, which is a large insurance company that has a large technology division, very focused on healthcare, and actually is the leading remote healthcare app in China. So how do we compete in this market? Well, I think it's about finding a niche where there is a genuine gap in the service provision, whether that's through the specialist IP that's been developed for a particular application, or a particular problem that you're looking to solve. But clearly there are questions around your IP, your software IP, which will also come on and talk about. Sure, Graham will touch on that. So artificial intelligence is another area where China has seen huge growth in that area. A number of leading AI startups in China specializing in healthcare across a range of areas: medical imaging, diagnostics, disease prevention, drug discovery, and medical robotics. We've also seen some investment coming into UK startups, scale-ups from Chinese venture capital funds and Chinese strategic investors. Investments by the likes of Tencent. Babylon Health has formed partnerships. Other companies such as TPP and Medopad have formed strategic partnerships with Chinese companies to develop services for the China market. So these are all areas where I think there is opportunity, but given some of the challenges around data, access to data and IP, then obviously there are some things that companies need to be aware of before approaching the market. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to skip through a couple of these slides. The the key point here, I would say, is that, as I've said before, China is a fragmented market. Local presence is important, and it's important to...
Hi, Mark. I'm really sorry. We're going to have one more minute until we've got to pass over to the next speaker.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I'm nearly finished, so I'm going to skip through this just to highlight that we have a variety of resources there for medical companies. So we have several reports that you can download. Our website has also a China Business Guide with more practical information about doing business in China. We also have a new digital advisor that's free to use. So if you're interested in sort of gathering together some of these insights and having a conversation with a digital advisor, please do access that platform. CBBC obviously does provide various market research, market entry services, which again, I won't go into in too much detail, but essentially, whether you're looking to research the market, employ someone locally in China, or just need some help liaising with partners, we do have a series of paid services that you can use to access that. So I'll leave it there, and I look forward to discussing more in the Q&A. Thank you.
Mark, thank you very much. We're now going to hand over to Graham McCallan, who is a patent and trademark attorney at NJ Akers Co. This is one of the most commonly asked questions for any company, really in any sector looking to do business in China. How do I protect my intellectual property, trademarking, etc.? So, sorry, Graham, thank you, and over to you.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Mark. Good morning, everyone. I'm Graham McCallum. I'm a patent and trademark attorney, and we assist clients with identifying and protecting their IP, both in the UK and overseas. This morning, obviously, we want to talk about China, in particular focus on the healthcare sector in China, and how UK companies going into China can effectively protect their IP and minimise the risk of losing their IP. So what I'd like to cover this morning is, first of all, looking at the IP landscape, then running through the various IP assets and particular issues that may come up in China, looking at possible risks, and then finally looking at IP strategy and what you should be doing before you go into China. So looking first of all at the IP landscape, there are often misconceptions in China about IP. Typical misconceptions include that there's a lot of IP theft, that there's counterfeiting, and that the courts tend to favour Chinese nationals. However, in many cases, the reality is somewhat different from that. China has become, in recent years, much more conscious of its reputation overseas. There have recently been substantial changes in the laws with increased damages and punitive damages as well. And this extends to the patents law, which was changed which had an amendment in October, November last year. And these changes will come into force in June of this year. Also, the courts have become more neutral. They're less likely to favour Chinese nationals. They're more likely to get a more transparent and reasonable decision from the Chinese courts than perhaps you would have done 15, 20 years ago. So this means that it's easier to have decisions enforced as well in China. Previously, what used to happen, or there tended to be a tendency for there to have court decisions in your favour, and then you would find that perhaps it was difficult to enforce them on the ground. And that might be because the particular town where the decision needed to be enforced, the police chief was perhaps a cousin of the person who owned the factory. So you find that you've got a decision in your favour, but you can't actually have it enforced. And in recent years, there's been a big crackdown by the Chinese government on that type of corruption, and it is much easier to have decisions enforced now than it used to be. Also, bad faith activity is now actively discouraged, and recently the Trademarks Act has been amended to to improve the bad faith provisions as well, to make it harder for people to file trademark applications and effectively steal your brands. It's still possible. It's something you need to be aware of because of the particularities of the Chinese law, but it is much more difficult for bad faith activity now. Innovation is now actively encouraged, so there's less emphasis on counterfeiting and copying, and there's more emphasis in China generally on innovation, which tends to encourage or make it less likely that your products are going to be copied. This still does happen, but this active encouragement of innovation is put more of an emphasis, less of an emphasis on copying and counterfeiting and the infamous Chinese copy. China is now the largest filer of PCT patent applications, which is an indication of the amount of innovation that's happening in China. And there are also specialist IP courts in, excuse me, in Beijing, Guangzhou, and Shanghai. And there are also a number of IP tribunals which specialize in technology-related IP lawsuits. So IP is very much at the forefront of some of the developments in Chinese law at the moment. So IP assets, looking first at patents, similar standards for patentability are similar to Europe. So, for example, there is some differences. For example, second medical use, they permit Swiss-type claims, so the use of a compound X for the manufacture of a medicament, or a claim of the type of the use of compound X for the manufacture of a medicament for the treatment of Y. Standards of sufficiency of disclosure tend to be higher than the UK or the EPO, and that's particularly true for chemical or pharma inventions. So you just have to be aware that when you're filing a Chinese patent application, that you've got sufficient information in there. There are proposals to allow later filing of supplemental data after filing of the patent application, but as far as I'm aware, these haven't actually been implemented yet. One of the provisions of the Patents Act amendment that happened at the end of October, November, was that they're introducing patent term extensions from June this year. So these will operate in a similar manner to SPCs in the UK and Europe. They'll provide for a maximum of 5 years additional protection, and this will be for a maximum of 14 years from the product approval process. Utility models, these are something that we don't really come across too much in the UK, but in China they are used quite extensively, especially by Chinese companies. And they're a sort of lower, more basic form of patent application. They have a number of pros. They tend to be quicker and less expensive to obtain. They only go through a formality examination, so they don't go through a substantive examination. And the inventive step threshold is lower as well. There are some disadvantages of them. The protection is less. The protection is only 10 years, unlike 20 years for patents. And you can only protect devices or chemical compositions, so you can't protect methods or processes for manufacturing something. So there are a number of ways you can use utility models. Obviously, there are a cheaper alternative to patent applications. In addition, you can use them in China to provide intermediate protection while your patent application is pending. So when you file your patent application, you can also file a utility model. Typically, the utility model will be granted much more quickly and will provide protection while your patent application is going through the patent prosecution and examination process. When the Chinese patent grants, then you can choose to abandon the utility model and rely on the patent. Trademarks, so brands. China is very much a first-to-file country, and this means that it's important to file early, and also, ideally, you want to protect your trademark in China before you enter the Chinese market, and if possible, before you speak to Chinese distributors as well. As mentioned previously, the bad faith provisions have recently been strengthened, so that is less of a problem than it was. although it is something you still need to be aware of. Also, it's less likely to favour Chinese companies than it was a few years ago. And you need to also think about, if you don't file your trademark application, your trademark in China, someone else will, and can you afford not to be able to use your mark in China? Designs, so there might be designs for products such as stents or grafts or catheters. Designs must be registered. There are no unregistered rights in China, unlike the UK. Also, China has no grace period. So in the UK, there's a 12-month grace period. That grace period doesn't apply in China, so it's important that any design is filed before you disclose it. The protection is 15 years for designs in China, as from the 1st of June 2021, compared to 25 years in the UK and Europe. And another change from June this year is that it will be possible to protect parts of articles as well. So IP risks. IP risks, particularly trade fairs in China, are known to inspire infringers. So our advice would be to avoid showcasing important know-how, not to allow photos, and also some companies restrict access to stands to known or invited participants as well, to minimise the risk of IP theft or and counterfeiting. So finally, I'd like to finish up with summarising some IP strategy points that you should probably take on board before entering China. First and foremost is to start early and to plan ahead. Think about what you're going to be doing. Understand your IP assets and the risks. What have you got within the business? What will you be transferring across to China? What will be the risks of that? Think about whether you can afford not to own or use your IP in China. And consider what others will want to do, especially your competitors. Your competitors may be particularly interested in particular aspects of your products. There may be other aspects of the products they're not particularly interested in. And identify and protect your IP before you go into China. If you go into China before you protect and identify your IP, then somebody else may file a trademark application or another application before you, and it may be very difficult to get it back from them, and it could be extremely expensive as well. So in summary, do your due diligence, minimize the risk, and also learn from other people's experiences. There are a lot of other people out there who've got experience of the Chinese market, and we're quite happy to share their experiences, and you can learn from that as well. So that's really, I think, sums up quite well what you should be doing before you enter the Chinese market. Okay.
Graham, thank you so much. Conscious of time, everyone, so there's just 2 points I'd like to quickly say, which I think are very important. Number one, Graham is based here in the region, in the southwest, and works with a lot of UK-based exporters in this sector. So tackling your IP strategy and mitigating risk where China is concerned is certainly not insurmountable. There is support here in the UK, the same time zone, the same language, etc. So please do, reach out before engaging. Perhaps with China is the most prudent strategy. Talk to somebody like Graham. There isn't enough time in this webinar to talk about broader legal considerations. So when generally entering the market, company incorporation, contracts, NDAs, the events that we will be running that you will be aware of on the 19th of March will feature Graham again, in addition to Medilink and another legal company, to talk more broadly about legal strategies when exporting. So please do join that. Thank you again, Graham. Finally, our last speaker is Hamish King. Hamish is based in Hong Kong but works with a significant number of UK companies. He is the Chief Operating Officer of Cisema and is here to talk about device registration, and more broadly the regulatory environment for companies within our sector. So, Hamish, thank you very much, and over to you.
Thanks, Jamie, and thanks for having me. As Jamie said, I'm Hamish King with Cisema, and I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the regulatory hurdles that medical device and IVD manufacturers face, in particular when entering the Chinese market. Just briefly about us, we're a CRO and regulatory affairs company based out of Hong Kong, but founded in Germany. And most of our staff are on the ground in China. We're 100% China focused. Please get in touch if you have any queries or want to ask any further questions. The first thing to know is, if you don't already, that is that the regulator in China covering medical devices, IVD, pharmaceutical products, and cosmetics is the National Medical Products Administration, or NMPA. It was previously known as the CFDA, but now name was changed following a restructure in 2018. It has an English language website, which I've pictured here on the slide, and it's worthwhile having a look because there is some information, and they're adding to it, that helps you with your decision making, including guidelines and regulations. The NMPA has recently published a report for the year 2020, providing some interesting statistics, which I thought I'd share. Some of the numbers give you a sense of the market size and trends for medical devices and IVD, including software. After the number of registrations stalled in 2017 and 2018 due to various regulatory requirement changes, they've increased dramatically in the last couple of years. As you can see, in 2020, there were 9,849 medical device, including IVD registrations in China, out of a total of 10,500 applications. And these numbers don't include Class 1 and 2 domestic products because they're submitted to the local MPA. 6,246 medical devices, including IVDs, were registered by importers in 2020, with the breakdown approximately 2/3 devices and 1/3 IVDs. The US was the #1 importer to China, followed by Germany, Japan, and Switzerland, and the UK sits around 5th spot, although this can vary from year to year. The top products are dental for last year, followed by medical imaging and orthopedic implants, as well as surgical instruments and ophthalmic devices. COVID-19 has been, it can't be ignored in the last year or so. And as already mentioned by Mark, it's had global repercussions for the healthcare industry. In particular in China, it's accelerated some of the trends, for example, towards telehealth and digital therapeutics and AI products. There's some interesting developments with so-called internet hospitals in China. This designation means that you can recover costs on the reimbursement system, which is very important because it covers a large, or 95% of the China population, and obviously greatly assists with sales. In terms of the software products or digital therapeutics, that's been a booming industry in China with artificial intelligence, the buzzword, and it's seen great growth in China as well. I've just set out on the right side of the slide some future trends and opportunities to consider. In terms of the more technical regulatory side of things, the first step is determining what risk class your product falls into. There are 3 levels of risk in the China classification system for medical devices and IVDs, with level 3 being the highest risk. Whilst home country risk classification is a decent indicator of your China risk class, it's not determinative. And instead, there's an extensive catalogue of product areas in China that determine what risk class the product falls into. On this slide, I've just set out a natural way of, or logic tree of thinking about how you go about getting your product risk classified in China. You start with the risk classification catalogue, which is quite comprehensive but not exhaustive. Then you move to specific rules, and if it's still not clear, you can apply for a classification with the regulator. For software products in particular, there's a distinguishment made between embedded software and standalone software. That's SAMD and SIMD. These are globally recognized terms because China is part of the IMDRF, or the Global Regulators Forum. Similarly to other products, there's a classification framework, although it's more likely when you have a standalone software that you're going to need to apply for some classification clarification, because it is such a novel area. The next key tip I just wanted to point out for companies who are thinking about exporting to China is to consider your local agent. The application must be made by a Chinese entity. You have three options for this. You have your own subsidiary in China, which is probably a preferred or belts and braces option, but it's more costly and it has ongoing compliance obligations and costs. You can opt for your distributor in China, although that has risks and we caution our clients to go with that option. It's usually the least costly up front, but can be the most costly down the track because of complications arising relating to IP that Graham's already touched on, because you need to provide your information to the local agent in order to submit the application dossier. You can also opt for a third-party legal agent, which is what we do for our clients quite commonly, because you can have an objective party that is bound by confidentiality measures and has no conflicts of interest in the same way as a distributor. On this slide, I've just set out a brief timeline relating to what the classification as well as all the other steps in the registration process look like. It may be a bit of a shock compared to some other jurisdictions, but the time periods are generally 18 months for Class 2 and 21 months for Class 3 products. The reason for that is because of the local testing requirement in China. Only biocompatibility reporting reports can be recognized in China. Everything else must be retested locally in China. If you need to do a clinical trial as well, that can add another year or more. To give you an idea of cost, I've just set out here the official fees for Class 2 and Class 3 products. As you'll see, the Class 1, there's no fees applicable. Although it's generally the case that in the UK and Western countries are exporting the higher technology and therefore usually the higher risk classes to China. So it's generally Class 2 and 3 that are more relevant. The exchange rate, as you may be aware, is about 10 to 1. Renminbi to GDP, so there's around £20,000 for Class 2 or 30,000 for Class 3, and that's just the official fees. Actually, a total cost is more likely to be around £50,000 for the registration from start to finish for the 18 months, and upwards of more like £60,000 to £80,000 for a Class 3 product. In the last few slides, I just wanted to set out some of the digital developments in the regulatory process. The NMPA itself, as I've mentioned, has an English language website, which is worthwhile looking at to find out various information. There's also an online, what they call an ERPS application system now, so that you don't need to send lots of documents to China in hard copy, signed and notarized, etc., although there still is a few documentary requirements. There's also more recently an electronic certificate issuance, which is a step in the right direction because there are risks associated with not having your original document, your original NMPA certificate, which is definitely something to be aware of. In my final slide, I wanted to share with you an interesting recent product which has been registered with the NMPA in China. It's an AI, China's first Class 3 AI medical device approved nearly a year ago now, but it was announced with much fanfare by the NMPA. Since this registration, which funnily enough had to be listed or registered with a CE mark first, despite being a Chinese company, it required clinical trials in China, both a retrospective and a prospective clinical trial. But since that first approval, there's been a number of other interesting AI products that have been approved, which I think just really shows the increased appetite for high-tech products. And it's something that the UK really excels at. So there's been ECG analysis software, diagnostic software, and imaging-assisted pulmonary nodule detection software, which have recently been registered. And we're working actually currently with a number of clients who have really world-class products that are in the process of trying to register their product in China. So that's a real whirlwind, if I can even say the word. And if you have any more questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Now, Jamie, back to you.
Hamish, thank you so much for your presentation. We've got 8 minutes left, and we have had a few questions that have come in. The first one is for yourself, Mark. So we have a question here that you've said that 95% of the population is now covered by some form of medical coverage. Is this provided by the state or privately? And do we know if there's any social welfare provided to disabled individuals by the state?
Yes, that's the answer. So the majority of pretty much the majority of China's population are covered through some kind of government provided provision, which is obviously administered through regionally across different cities and at different tiers of regional government across China. So you do find that there are minor differences in terms of the healthcare provision across different regions, and it will vary a little bit according to the age and the working status of those individuals. So it is a slightly complex picture. The second question was about disability. Yeah, it's not an area that I know that I have a huge amount of insight into. So it's probably something that we would need to look at further. So I don't know off the top of my head exactly what the policies are, but I'm pretty sure that that's something which is covered, obviously in a very different way to how things are here in the UK. But that's something. If they're interested in learning more, that's certainly something we can connect to our China team and help find out a bit more information about.
This is fantastic. We're getting loads of questions coming through at the end. So for those in the panel that want to jump in and answer them, please try and keep it as brief as possible. The next question that we've received is there, with respect to healthcare infrastructure, are there the equivalent to HTM, HBN requirements, and where can we find them? I think that's regarding building notes and essentially, is there a guideline in China around the specifications that are required when building healthcare infrastructure? So that could be hospitals, clinics. Are there any guidelines around what standards need to be reached, essentially? I don't know, Hamish, I don't want to speak on your behalf, but I think kind of the infrastructure of hospital planning is perhaps not something that's covered really in the regulatory environment. Or Mark, I don't know if you know that. I know you work with some pretty impressive design and construction firms within your portfolio that have experience of planning and building hospitals in China.
Yeah, I think that's something that it's quite a niche area, but I think it may be one that our infrastructure team that would be better placed to answer in terms of what the specific rules and regs are in relation to hospital development. I know that we have run some events previously. I think we've even done webinars on that topic. So that might be one for us to dig out some past reports and information to share on that particular topic.
And just from me, from the regulatory angle, a key consideration increasingly, and actually Graham's touched on it in his presentation, is around cybersecurity risks, and those specifically really apply to hospitals and institutions. So that's one thing to just be a bit wary about is how the data flow will work.
Hamish, thank you. The next question, I've been reliably informed by the events team that we actually have another 10-15 minutes. So for any of those that are on the line that can stay on, thank you very much. The next question is for you, Graham. Should we assume that no samples for partner assessment should be sent until all IP/trademarks are in place? In which case, does there need to be a commitment to the market before engaging with potential partners, customers? I guess an IP, do we need to be getting this sorted out, I guess, before we start engaging with any kind of conversations with prospective partners in China? Sorry, Graham, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thanks, Jamie. Yes, in an ideal world, definitely, I think it's good practice to try and have your IP filed before you enter the market in China. It's not necessarily that it needs to be granted or registered, but at least the first stage in the process of actually filing it, so you've planted your flag in the sand as of a particular day before you start to make disclosures, is what you should do in an ideal world. If you decide not to do that, then I think that's fine. That's a business decision. You just need to be aware of the risks that and whether you trust your distributor or the people that you're speaking to there. Certainly an excellent idea to use NDAs. I think even if you've already filed your IP, an NDA still makes a good sense with potential distributors or partners in China or indeed any country. But certainly if you've decided not to file your IP first, then yeah, using an NDA would be a great idea and would help to focus their minds on the fact that you consider the information you're disclosing to them to be confidential. And
also just to add, it is from a regulatory angle, but sometimes your submission and application is also something that, as I've said, can have a long timeline. So engaging with a consultant or some other CRO as to how that works, and you have an NDA in place because it's got foreign substance, then that can also be a consideration as to easing your pathway in, notwithstanding everything that Graham said. Yeah.
I think one thing to add on that is with certain types of IP, Jamie. We didn't really have time to touch on this in the presentation, but with certain types of IP, there needs to be an application filed before there is any public disclosure. So that would apply particularly to patents and also designs in China. So it may be that if you've already filed, for example, a UK or a European patent, that you need to file a Chinese patent application anyway within 1 year from filing of the UK or European patent application. Trademarks aren't quite so time critical like that, but it would still make sense to file before you enter the Chinese market if you can. Okay.
Thank you both. The next question that we've received is, are there any particular medical specialities that are facing long waiting lists in China? I mean, that information is the major disease burdens, should I say, in China are widely available. This is something that is particularly accessible. I know that there's significant issues around NCDs in particular, cardiovascular diseases, for example, heart disease, cancer is a significantly growing burden in China. Respiratory disease, for example, in part linked actually to what Mark was discussing at the beginning around pollution and perhaps, you know, as economies, as countries develop, they become slightly unhealthier, right? I don't know if, you know, with specific regard to waiting lists, whether or not any panelists have any comments. If not, then of course we can have a follow-up conversation with this particular company.
No comments from me, Jamie.
You've said it all, Jamie.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably how accessible that information is, and I suspect that the picture, as we said, is likely to be quite, I'd say, different depending on where we're looking at regionally, and you know the which tier of hospital we're talking about, in which area. There's a lot of complexity there actually. So I think it's probably you know, it's probably would be important actually to look at that on at a micro level regionally. I think national statistics. I mean, we in the UK, I guess, get used to, you know, the NHS being as a single organisation, which I think in China, you know, they really, hospitals don't work under the same type of framework. So you would probably need to sort of narrow down a little bit what you were looking specifically, which region or which area you were looking to focus on, and then go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Just on that point, interestingly, there was an article on the BBC a few weeks ago which referenced a source in China, a government source in China, that in China today, just over 50% of all adults are categorized as obese, which is obviously not perhaps the ideal direction that we do want to go in. But the point being is that information is available. But Mark is absolutely right. There's huge geographical disparity in China, and perhaps various burdens are more prominent or more apparent in localized areas. The final question that we've had come through is, I guess, kind of a statement as well. For many medical companies in the UK, getting in front of the NHS commissioning bodies can be more complex and challenging than exporting to overseas markets. We have heard of examples of UK life sciences companies whose sales are close to 100% export. To what extent does China provide this opportunity for UK exporters? Apologies if I'm misinterpreting that question, and whoever's asked that, please do feel free to get in touch, and we can kind of have a one-to-one conversation.
Jamie, just on one of the things that a lot of the presentations have mentioned is the importance nowadays of AI and software, and I think one of the aspects of that is, do you file a patent application? And I think there are particular aspects on the detectability of these types of inventions, particularly with lower level stuff like source code and algorithms. And there may be a discussion to have when assessing the risk is, do you actually file a patent application, or do you keep it as a trade secret? But that's also a whole other presentation in itself.
Sure. No, that's fine, Graham. Thank you. I think apologies to whoever's asked this particular question. Please do take it up. I mean, I'm interpreting that as, you know, is there an opportunity for UK companies to get in front of, you know, commissioners in China, perhaps at a ministerial level? I'm not 100% sure, so I'm not going to go off on a tangent, but please feel free to get in touch if you would like to.
Finally, the only thing I might say to that is that there are particular trade zones in China, you know, which you'll be aware of, and sometimes, you know, it's worth thinking about those trade zones, particularly as an initial entry point. And so in that regard, you know, that they try to smooth the way and even, you know, make it very simple to import to specific areas of China. such as in Hainan, which is the southernmost area of China. It's like China's Hawaii, and they're trying to encourage a healthcare destination, internal tourist destination. And so that's one thing to consider, some of these specific trade zones.
I think also, just to add to that, I think the key difference, I suppose, with China from perhaps the UK, the way things work here with the commissioning bodies, is the sort of the reimbursement list and move towards sort of centralised procurement in many regions in China. So actually, China's sort of moving away from the more informal distribution of medical devices and pharmaceuticals towards a more formalised, open system. But obviously, in order to kind of have products, kind of go onto those reimbursement lists and in order to access those opportunities, it's still necessary for foreign companies to have distribution into China. So either working with a licensed distributor that can help with that, or potentially having some kind of presence there. So that's probably the difference. The relationships are still important. So although it's we're moving towards centralisation and a more open sort of procurement system, that doesn't preclude the need to have some form of local partner or presence in order to gain access to that. So obviously there's significant differences in the way that works from here in the UK.
Mark, thank you for that. Conscious of time, before just closing statements from any of the panelists, I just want to say that obviously the Department for International Trade, we're based locally here in the Southwest. We do also have an extensive network in China. That includes in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Chongqing, and in Wuhan. So we have the support on the ground. We, of course, have the partners that we work with, and those are an excellent resource for you as well here today. That, of course, includes our speakers and the companies that they represent. So, Mark, Graham, Hamish, I don't know if you wanted to just make a quick closing remark for the attendees that have stayed on today. So thank you for those that have. Graham, you first, shall we say?
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for attending today and listening to the presentations. We're very active in China. We assist a lot of companies with supporting their strategies into China, brand protection and patent protection as well. And delighted to have a conversation with you about what your vision for China is, what your strategy is for China, and how we can support you going into China. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Hamish?
Thanks, Gene. Well, just for me is that, I do quite a lot of these events, and I'd like to say that, the comments that we've had and commentary from Graham and Mark is some of the more insightful that I've seen. So you're in very good hands in the southwest of England here, I would say, and look forward to helping any companies that have particular regulatory questions for China.
Thank you, Hamish. Mark, finally from yourself?
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you again to DIT for organising today's event and to everyone for attending. It's very difficult in a short event like this to really answer all these questions. And I think the one thing that we've seen from this session is that just how complex China is as a market. So what I would encourage you to do is to reach out to either Jamie or myself, or both of us, if you do have follow-up questions that need answering. We don't know the answer to everything. Fortunately, there is a team of people in China that we have access to that can provide the answers, or can certainly know the ways and means to get them. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And it's like what I said about IP. What this seeks to do is demystify, not necessarily provide all of the answers, but just be a support blanket for companies to make them aware that China isn't isn't perhaps the smoke and mirrors that it's often perceived to be, and there is help out there. So on that note, I will let everybody carry on with their day, and Hamish in Hong Kong, your evening. So thank you all to those that attended. Thank you to the participants, and we look forward to welcoming you onto forthcoming webinars in the near future. Thank you, everyone. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you.